Hey guys, Bluffmunkey back again for Sonic Academy, and in today's video I want to take a look at a couple of techniques or ways that you can train your ears, these things, to recognize certain frequencies. It's basically frequency training, if you like. So let's get straight into that. Okay, so I've created a little project as usual. It's just a few loops that I've thrown together to describe certain frequency ranges. The idea I wanted to try and introduce is that I've made a couple of little diagrams here, is that certain frequencies have certain qualities. Now, in terms of mixing, we tend to recognize 6 main bands. So we've got 20 to 60, which is sub bass, 20 to 60 hertz, should I say, 60 to 200 hertz is bass, and the 60 to 200 range is more, and slightly higher is more what you'd hear on things like phones and laptops. You're never going to hear the sub bass on a laptop or a phone. And that transfers over to low mids as well, 200 to 600. A lot of modern music now is saturating bass lines so that they appear higher up as well, so that if you are listening on smaller speakers, those bass lines will show up. So 200 to 600 hertz low mids, 600 to 3000 hertz mids, 3000 to 800 hertz high mids, and 8000 to 20,000 is the highs. Now, these terms in themselves, they're not set in stone. These are just rough approximations of where these sounds can sit, or often do sit. But what does that mean in terms of how you hear things? Well, I've made another diagram for that, which I'd like to introduce now. It took me literally minutes to put this together with an incredible amount of skill. But this diagram here, it's basically a screenshot of, let me just maximize that. It's a screenshot of the Ableton EQ blown up. And you've got the frequency range at the bottom here. This is down at 0, 100 hertz, 1000 hertz, and 10,000 hertz. So this is showing the complete frequency range. And what I've done is I've used words in green, which are kind of like the positive connotations to certain frequency ranges, and in red the negative connotations. And I've stretched the words out so that they roughly span where these areas are. So low end you would often consider to be between kind of 20 hertz and 100 hertz. Now that covers both sub bass and into the bass region. Bass punch and warmth. So punch starts at 100, goes up to nearly 200, or between 100 and 200, I would say. Warmth around 100 up to 400 or 500. As we were talking earlier, that bass warmth that you hear in laptop speakers and phones is going to be around that area. Definition 1K up to about 4 or 5K. Presence slightly higher than that. And then air 10K and over. So that's the really top end ethereal. But obviously the converse of that is these positive attachments we make to certain frequency ranges. Air can become brittle or piercing. Definition and presence can become harsh or sibilant. Punch, warmth can go into the muddy, boxy and honky area. I've often used that word honky. Now my brain actually perceives it slightly lower than that. Or at least I perceive that word being connected to frequencies lower than that. So these words aren't absolutes. These are suggestions of how you might perceive them, but you can use other words to attach to the kind of reaction that your brain has to certain frequencies. And then further down we've got rumble and boominess. Now rumble, a good example of that is if I kind of tap the microphone stand there, you'll hear a lot of low frequencies coming up through the stand itself. That's why a lot of microphones have a high pass filter, so you can automatically filter that out before you even record it. So this is something that you can kind of have a think about and try and make a connection. And we're going to have a look at a couple of methods that you might be able to use to make that connection. Now, a good analogy I've used before is so when you're trying to make connections in your brain, using words can be quite valuable, because trying to remember a sound can often be quite difficult, because they are often quite abstract kind of concept sounds. What does something sound like? Well, you have to attach a word to that to have meaning. So if any of you have ever done any weight training, I used to weight train a lot when I was younger. No, really, I did. But if you're trying to isolate a certain muscle, I worked with a bodybuilder once for a couple of years, And he said to me that if I want to work this muscle, this one here, as I'm working it, just put a finger on it. And as you feel it, like you can actually see that moving, as you feel it moving, because you're touching it and you're trying to isolate it, your brain makes a different connection with that exercise. It understands slightly better the movements you need to make to activate that muscle. And that can be the same with any, if you're doing bench press, either you can touch your chest, which is a bit difficult, or even if somebody else does it, if you feel that connection as you're exercising and you feel that movement, the connection to your brain is slightly improved. So to that end, I've waffled a bit now. So this project, let's just have a quick listen to it. So we've got some drums, some percussion, there's a bass, and I've created a pad out of a loop using Valhalla shimmer and a compressor. So the reason I've put these particular sounds together is it goes from low end to high end. So if we look on the master channel, you can see all the frequencies being represented relatively evenly there. So let's switch that off. So one of the issues that people tend to have a lot is trying to hear the low end. Now I've got some pretty good speakers here. I had some very expensive speakers here before that turned out to be too big for this room, even with the treatment. But they were unbelievably powerful with a massive low end, and it allowed me to hear details that I'd never heard before. Combination of very expensive speakers and some room treatment meant that all of a sudden, even at my age, I was like, oh, I'm actually learning stuff here. However, what I will say to you is you don't need to have this perfect monitoring setup. When I'm mixing low end in the way that I'm going to show you, I will still go for a trusted set of good headphones because I can just perceive it better. Like even with these and this treatment, this room is still not good enough to really do that proper low end justice. So don't worry if you haven't got a setup like this. Good headphones that you learn and trust are good enough. Now often people are going to waffle on about stereo imaging headphones. Well, this low end you're going to be mixing and making adjustments in mono anyway, so it doesn't matter as far as I'm concerned. So right, the trick I use is I'm going to put my headphones on. Now if I want to figure out stuff in the low end, let's go back here. So we want to focus on this low end area, but we are going to be listening out for rumble and boominess. So this is like 20-30 hertz up to just over 100 hertz, roughly. Again, these words not set in stone. So where are we? Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go onto the master. I'm already there, and I've got this EQ8 set up, and I've got the EQ8 set up with a low pass at 90 hertz. I'm going to go up to 130. That's probably more than enough for what we need, and I'm going to switch that on while I'm listening to the low end. So if you listen really carefully, if you're listening on headphones, even at 130 and below, I can hear the percussion loop, I can hear the pad. Now, we probably just want to focus this area on the fly. We can focus this area on the drums and the bass. So what I'm going to do is whilst I've got the low pass engaged, I'm going to solo this percussion loop. So even down there, I mean, with the understanding that we've got a bit of roll off going up to 200, 300, 400 hertz, so we're still going to hear stuff above that, but we don't want to filter it too much because then it just doesn't sound right. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to come onto the percussion channel with this low pass on the master engaged, and I'm going to do my high pass with that filter engaged. Now, it can be hard to hear, but what you're trying to listen to that quality, rumble, boominess, rumble and boominess. That's what we're trying to hear on the headphones. So down there, I'm getting a little bit of it. Now, if you're on speakers, you might not hear this. If you're on a laptop, you might not hear this. So you're going to have to put some headphones, even if it's earbuds. You're not making a critical mixing decision with the earbuds. You're just trying to listen to what I'm doing. So I feel around there, if I set that to around 100 hertz, I feel that I'm getting rid of the worst of that kind of boxy, no, not boxy, that rumble. So what I want to do then is turn the low pass on the master off, and I want to hear what that adjustment sounds like in the mix, because you don't want to really do that in isolation. Yeah, and it's not making a massive difference to the mix there. So the next thing I want to do is the same thing with a pad. So let's put the low pass on the master. Yeah, you can actually hear quite a lot of kind of boominess there. That gets rid of it. You hear that? So I'll set that to just above 100. And again, we're going to listen to that in the context of the mix. So turn that off. That actually makes a bigger difference to the pad sound than it does the percussion loop to my ears in the headphones, but not to its detriment. I think it actually sounds better like that. It's giving us a little bit of clarity. So the next thing I want to do is I'm going to turn these two off. Percussion and the pad we're going to switch off. We're going to low pass the master again. And again, this is just about honing into a particular frequency. Okay, we'll do something else in a second. And there is a rumble, there is a, you know, that kind of thing that I'm not liking. So I'm going to try and figure out which one of these it's coming from. Is it the loop or is it the bass line? So I'm going to turn them off one at a time. To me, that sounds nice and tight. That's obviously where it's coming from. Now this loop it's already ducked. I don't need to think about ducking it, but I think it is doing that thing a little bit too much. So what we'll do is I'll put high pass on the bass as well. We've still got the low pass engaged on the master. And going back to this document here, we're looking for punch and warmth. So 100 hertz and above, up to 300 or 400 hertz. Let's try and do something there. And again, we're doing this with the low pass on the master engaged so we can focus on that area. And this is what this video is really about. It's how do you focus on certain areas. So I'm going to start high passing it, but I'm also going to increase the Q a little bit. It's quite nice there, but I feel we're probably going to high pass it too much if we do that. So let's turn the EQ off. So the worst of that really woofy, boomy sound is gone, but we might have done too much. Turn the loop back on. Yeah, so with that EQ off on the bass line, you're getting that real kind of overwhelming, it's almost like a baffling sound. You know when you've got the car windows, two car windows open, you're going down a fast road, you get that, it's kind of that kind of thing. Yeah, I prefer it with the EQ on. Now, obviously, going back to this diagram again, if you push up too much in this area, on this bass line, you're going to be going into muddy, boxy, not honky, but muddiness and boxiness. So let's just do that deliberately. That's muddy. That boom. You don't want that. Right, so let's put the other elements in as well. And we've got a lot less of that low end rumble now. So let's come to the master, turn this low pass off. And one by one, we're going to turn these EQs off. The EQing we've just done, we're going to turn them off one at a time. Yeah, the difference is small. We're trying to do small differences here, and that's why we hone in. That's why we use the low pass and the master to hone in on that particular area. Now you can do this at any part of the mix. I'm just using the low end because that's often, well, let's face it, 95% of the time it's the most problematic area to mix. So if you're using headphones, which I suggest you do, what I want you to try and perceive is like the baffling or the rumbling sound that you might sense it between your ears. It's almost like it's coming from the center of your head. And then we'll turn these EQ adjustments back on again. And that odd low end sensation will be diminished slightly. Yeah. For me, it's diminished a lot. But that's me using these headphones, which I've used for nearly a decade now. I've got a few pairs of these because I love them so much. And I wouldn't change them for anything else because they work for me. So that's one way of looking at it. But what I also want you to do is, what we can also do is let's turn this into a high pass. And another technique that I've actually found can be quite useful is if we go back to just soloing the low end. So focus on what the low pass is doing. Actually, listen to what's going on and then try and still focus on it when I switch the low pass off. So I'm going to switch it on and off a few times. So hopefully what some of you, or all of you maybe, might notice is that when you focus in on that low pass version of the track and then I turn the low pass off, your brain can still be steered towards what it was just listening to. And this is about training, exposing yourself to a certain part of the track, then all of the track, then a certain part of the track, and then all of the track. And it does help kind of coerce your ears into listening to things in a certain way. Now we can do the opposite as well. I can use another EQ to take that low end part of the track out. So let's try that. Let's go back to the other version. See what I'm doing there? As you focus on a section, remove the section, listen to the whole thing, your brain starts to make that, you remember that connection I talked about? It's focusing on a specific point where your attention needs to be. So that's something to consider. Now you don't have to just focus on the low end, like I said. You can, let me just remove this. We can do this for anything. So if I use this, let's turn this EQ off. Let's say we want to focus on the boxy area. So we're going to come up to 250 to 550. So what I can do here is let's turn all these off. We're going to turn the high pass on. And we're going to have one other band. And I'm going to set that band 3, to, let's say, 350 hertz. Let's move all these together. Now I'm going to boost this one slightly. And then I'm going to select them all together and have a listen to what it sounds like. Okay, I found something there I don't like. 225 hertz. Let's go back to this and look at where we are. So we're around here. Muddiness and boxiness. Okay, I'd go along with that. What happens if we pull that down? The muddiness and boxiness disappears. Now you might recognize this as a technique that you're already using for EQing, where you make a peak and then you sweep to try and find resonances. Well, one caution I would like to get you to observe with that is that unless you're kind of already trained in listening to certain frequencies, you're not necessarily going to be picking out the right ones all the time. I struggled with this for a long, long time, because if you boost the frequency, it's going to become more resonant anyway. You are making it more resonant by default by boosting it. So when you first start out, you might find that you boost these frequencies, you sweep them, and everything sounds resonant. So you start pulling out all of these little nodes on an EQ because you can, and all of a sudden, everything sounds a bit dead and lifeless. It wasn't so long ago when, mixing engineers had 2 or 3 bands to work with per channel. They didn't have these options to pull down 7 or 8 EQ nodes at once. So there's limited value in doing that. I'm not saying there isn't value in doing it, but there's limited value. Now, one more thing I'd like to have a look at is this idea that certain frequencies can sound like vowels. So I've made another little document here. And really, this is just about making more connections with certain frequencies. Now, for example, you might find that between 100 and 200 hertz, if you're listening to something really loud, especially in a club, you feel it in your chest. Making connections physically or mentally using words or sounds with frequencies is the way to go. This is what we're trying to achieve here. So if you look at this chart here, 250 hertz is going to sound like ooh. 500 hertz is going to sound like oh. 1000 hertz is going to sound like ah. Not ah, really. 1000 hertz is ah, like a ah. 2000 hertz is going to sound like ah. And 4000 hertz is going to sound like e. And you're like, really? What? Well, let's prove it. So I'm going to use a different channel here, which is just an instance of Ana2 with some pink noise. So if we look at the first node I've set up, which is 250 hertz. Now, going back to this, 250, that should sound like ooh. Now, it's not going to sound like a human being saying ooh, but make the connection. Hear it? Uh, 500 is oh. A 1000 is going to be ah. $2,000 ah. And then 4,000 is going to be e. Okay, so that's a little experiment I'd like you to do at home as well. So set up a pink noise channel and do some boosts like this. And the reason you're doing it is you're going to think to yourself, well, why do I need to do that? Because I'm not going to be, my track isn't going to sound like pink noise. No, it's not. But when you do have a full track, even if I do, if you've got a dense mix, boosting at 4K in a dense mix, you're gonna hear that slight E sound, and the more you expose yourself to it, the more your brain's going to be able to pick it out of other sounds in a mix. And this is the point. It's about trying to quickly make a connection between a certain sound and a certain problem frequency. And the main reason to do this is not so that you can fix a mix, but what you will find is once you start exposing yourself to these little techniques, is that you'll be able to make these decisions before you add a sound to a mix. You'll be browsing through samples, or you might have recorded a vocal, or you might have put a synth line in, and immediately before you've even tried to mix it, your brain's made the connection. Remember the muscle connection? Your brain's made the connection, so it knows where to go. It knows where the issue is before you even start putting sounds into a mix. And you will find that happens, but it takes practice. You need to do this a lot of times over a lot of years, but you'll start to see the benefits quickly. So really, it's just a couple of techniques to try and help you focus in on certain frequencies in a mix rather than just, you know, using that sweep technique is kind of okay if you already know what you're doing. But other than that, you're really just pissing in the wind. You don't really know where the problem is. It's better to know where the problem is first. So I hope you found this video useful, and I'll see you guys again soon. Cheers.
Thanks everyone for watching. We really appreciate all the support from you guys. If you love this video, then smash a like, and if you want to be notified about new videos, hit the subscribe and notification buttons. Peace!